here we are for lesson 1, talking about DJ fundamentals. We have in front of us a Xone 92 mixer and a pair of Pioneer CDJ 2000s. We're going to start by talking to you about how a house PA or a club PA connects to these systems and how the audio routing from the CDJs through the mixer functions. To start with, in any venue or club, festival environment, whatever it is, the standard piece of equipment will be one or multiple very large sound systems, which is usually referred to as the PA. Now, these sound systems are managed by sound techs. You, as a DJ, are not really directly responsible for dealing with them, but you are manipulating the mixer, which sends audio out to the house sound system. So the basic routing is very straightforward. We're using standard 2 CDJs, 1 mixer configuration here. Each of these CDJs plays CDs, tracks of USB sticks, etc. And it sends a stereo, so a single stereo audio signal into the mixer. So we have one coming from each CDJ into the mixer here. The mixer, as you'd expect, mixes these signals together, and then out of the back, it sends one stereo signal via these big cables here to the house sound system. From that point on, as a DJ, you don't have to worry about it. The sound technicians and so on will deal with the audio. Alright, so firstly we're going to describe the Allen & Heath Xone 92. Now we're going to go into a lot of detail on this in a later lesson, so here I'm just going to provide you a quick overview of what this is and what it's for. So Xone 92 is a particularly good example of what's called a DJ mixer. And a DJ mixer is a small, as you can see, almost portable mixer used by DJs that's designed to mix multiple potential audio sources. In this case, a pair of CDJs, but we could plug almost anything we could imagine into this mixer. It's designed to mix these audio sources together smoothly in a way that allows you to blend them together quite gracefully, and then send the combined result of that, one stereo channel, out to your main sound system. Now this Xone is what's called a club or an installation mixer, and this means it kind of has one of everything on it. This mixer is configured to have lots of different pieces of equipment plugged into it, with the expectation that lots of different performers will be using it over the course of a night. So while it looks really complicated and really confusing, a given DJ will only ever use a small proportion of the overall things in here. So it looks intimidating, but don't be too worried by that. It has everything in the kitchen sinks thrown in. Most DJ mixers, if you're buying one at home, or if you're playing in a smaller venue, will have a more essential subsection of these features and be less overall intimidating. As described, the audio to the mixer comes out the back of the CDJs here. So we've got a stereo cable here. And in this case, we can see 2 cables here and here running into the back of it. And we're going to go into more detail on that later. That audio comes through one of these 4 primary channels here, where you do all the manipulation and volume changes, and then it gets grouped together. You can see the level here. If we send some audio to the mixer, you can see the level here, we can see the master level here, and then that audio signal goes out. So the trick with the mixer is basically you can play 2 audio sources at once, like so. You can see audio here, and you can see audio here, and you can use these level meters, like so, to bring the audio levels up, and we can play 2 tracks at once. These tracks are not beat matched currently, incidentally, so this will sound awful. We'll talk about beat matching in a moment. These are Pioneer CDJ 2000s. CDJ 2000s are the latest generation of CDJ, and they're big flagship CDJs, kind of like the mixer is a club installation mixer, which has an expectation that many different people will be using it constantly. The CDJ 2000s are installation CDJs. They have all the possible features, and thus they can be a little bit overwhelming to use, but again, any given DJ will only be using a small section of the overall features available on this. Now, CDJs were developed back in the 90s, I believe, as a alternative to vinyl turntables. And originally they simply emulated vinyl turntables. This platter on the top behaves, can turn that up so you can hear it. This platter on the top behaves not entirely unlike when you grab the record on a turntable and move it around. We've got pitch faders, like on Technics 1200s, the traditional turntables. We've got play buttons and so on. However, CDJs have moved on a long way since they were primarily turntable emulations, and so while they do all the core things that turntables do, modern CDJs also have a lot of very handy features. You can see up here we've got this kind of large LCD screen that allows us to browse around tracks, things like that. We've got looping functions, we've got touch strips, we've got lights, there's different kind of adjustments you can make. A lot of cue behavior, for example. So instead of having to move a needle around on a turntable, we can have this little digital record of where the start point on the CDJ is currently at. And we can put CDs in here, obviously, although that's becoming decreasingly common. We can put USB sticks into the slot up here. We can put SD cards in. We can connect the CDJ to a computer via a cable on the back. There are a number of ways that we can get audio into this. These are kind of digital workhorses that you can put almost anything you can imagine into. Now, each CDJ is fundamentally very simple. A CDJ plays one track at a time. It plays one standard stereo track at a time, and it simply sends that track out via a cable here. There are no volume controls on a CDJ. There are no audio manipulation tools other than kind of looping and playhead position and so on. And all the audio manipulation, volume controls, taking the highs or the low frequencies out, crossfading, doing all that is done on the mixer. So obviously we need a minimum, and the most common number is 2, but a minimum of 2 CDJs, one track on the left, which would traditionally be called deck A, and one track on the right, which would be traditionally called deck B. And that setup is called 2-deck mixing and is the most common configuration for DJs by a long way. Alright, so we're going to talk now about the basic tools or the basic techniques that a DJ uses to perform a set. Now, DJing, at least in the electronic music world, which is what we're talking about primarily here, tends to happen in clubs, nightclubs, festivals, loud environments. It tends to happen at high volumes, and it tends to be done for an audience who are dancing. So it's electronic dance music typically. Obviously, there are other types of DJing, and there are other styles of music that can be DJed, but the majority of DJing with this sort of equipment is done for dance music events, and we're going to primarily be focusing on that when we talk about it. So DJs typically play for longer than bands. The shortest kind of typical time for a DJ set is 1 hour, but it's not unheard of for DJs to play 2 hours or 4, 5, 6 hours if they're particularly skilled, particularly experienced. And during that set, a DJ will play multiple individual tracks, typically written by a large number of different producers. So the DJ is taking a collection of tracks that they've curated themselves, and they are doing what's called mixing, overlapping them, blending these tracks together to make one continuous piece of music that takes place over a much longer period than any individual track. So an average dance music track would be about 6 minutes long, but the average DJ set would be about an hour and a half long. Now, there are 2 core techniques that DJs use to produce these kind of seamless, or at least ideally seamless transitions. The first is beat matching. Once upon a time, beat matching was the hardest skill, or at least the first difficult skill a DJ had to learn. This was back in the day when people were still performing on turntables, and it all had to be done by ear. This is very hard. Nowadays, with laptops or with nice seat DJs like this, beat matching is a very simple thing to learn. You could learn it in maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, depending on how much time you put in. And beat matching is the art of getting 2 tracks that are at different speeds. Playing at the same speed is the first point. So if you have one track at 132 beats per minute and one track at 134 beats per minute, you would either slow down one track or speed up the other so that they're going at the same tempo. This is easier said than done, but like I say, with modern tools, for example, these CDJs have a very accurate readout of the BPM. This one's at exactly 132, this one's at 133.4, and it's probably right. So that mechanic can be done relatively quickly now. In the old days with vinyl, you used to have to manipulate this, which is called the pitch fader, that speeds up or slows down one of the decks, and you would actually have to nudge tracks forward or nudge them back to get them operating at the same speed and synced up. Now, the second part of beat matching, which tends to get overlooked, is not just that the 2 tracks are going at the same speed, but that the beats actually line up with each other, and this is called phrasing. So at a basic level, if you've got 2 tracks with, say, a techno beat, which is just 4 kick drums per bar, 4 beats per bar, so kick, 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 kick. This is a techno track. If I go to somewhere where it actually has a beat, not there, there. That's a fairly typical techno beat. Now, for these two tracks to be in phase or phrased well, they would have to have the kicks lining up with each other. So the kicks would mesh, lie on top of each other like that, and both tracks would be moving at the same speed, so the kicks would stay on top of each other. If the tracks were moving at different speeds, these kicks would drift out, and you would get this pattern forming where the kicks would move out of time and then back into time with each other. This sounds really awful. It's not actually fun to use creatively. So there's also the phrasing at the bar level. Now, if you've got any kind of musical theory background, this will be very straightforward. But basically, the beats have to line up, and for dance music to work well, the bars also have to line up. So the downbeat on deck A should coincide with the downbeat on deck B. And lastly, at the higher level, the phrases in the electronic music tracks should line up. Electronic music almost universally uses a simple 8-bar phrase format. Again, if you know music theory, this will be very straightforward to you. If you don't, it might be worth looking this stuff up. But typically, 8-bar phrases, and for good mixing, these tracks should have those 8-bar phrases overlapping as well. So the start of the phrase on deck A should coincide exactly with the start of the phrase on deck B. So there's several layers, or it's a layered approach. There are several layers to beat matching. There's the tempo, there's the beats, there's the bar, and then there's the phrase. And for good mixing, all of these things have to be in line. Now, dance music makes this very easy. It is predictable, the tempo doesn't change, the phrases are almost all the same length, and because it is very percussive, usually with very strong kick drums and snares, it's very easy to hear where the beats are. There's no ambiguity about that. So learning to match most forms of electronic music is not particularly difficult. It gets harder and more involved when you're starting to match styles like drum and bass or breakbeat that have more complicated beat structures. And it gets really hard when you're trying to match acoustic recorded music, so live music where the tempo fluctuates around it constantly. One of the things that makes DJing possible is that in electronic music, the tempo is produced by a computer, remains exactly the same, so that when two tracks are in sync, they stay in sync indefinitely. This is an important part of mixing. So the second part of mixing, just to clarify the terminology here, mixing is both an overall term that refers to everything you do on the mixer and everything you do on the CDJ. So kind of what a DJ does is mixing. Mixing also refers specifically to just the things you do on the mixer, which include volume controls, so turning things up and down. It includes EQ controls, so taking the bass out, putting the bass back in, or potentially taking the high frequencies out and then putting them back in. These are the core tools you use to blend two tracks together. So we're going to talk about this specific aspect of mixing here. So here, I've got these two tracks playing at the same tempo, in this case 132 BPM, and I've got them playing in sync. And you'll notice that I brought in this track on, if you have got a decent understanding of music, you would have been able to hear that I brought in this track on deck B at the downbeat of the start of a phrase on deck A. So as long as these two tracks stay at the same tempo, which they should, they're both electronic music tracks, they should just stay in sync indefinitely. Now this doesn't sound particularly great at the moment because both of these tracks are playing at full volume at the same time and they have the full range of frequencies. But this setup I just did, getting these two tracks in sync like this, is the first step I would take in mixing. So once we have these two tracks playing at the same tempo, in sync, the next stage is the specific mixing on the mixer. So at a basic level, what we'll typically have is one track, in this case deck A, playing at full volume with no changes to the EQ. So this track is playing as it was produced in the studio and is playing out to the dance floor. It's important not to muck with tracks when you're performing them too much. They've been very lovingly produced and very lovingly polished, so generally it's best to leave them alone unless you're actually mixing. So we'll have a track playing like that, straightforward. Now what we want to do is blend this track here with this track on the side. So the tools we'll use to do that are volume and EQ. Now volume is self-explanatory. These volume faders up here turn up and down volume. You'll also notice that there's what's called a crossfader on the bottom here. Now a crossfader, if I switch the crossfader on, allows me to fade between two tracks that are not incidentally currently in sync. Now, crossfaders are kind of iconic of DJs. When people think of DJs, the crossfader is one of the most common tools they associate with them. However, in reality, the majority of DJs do not use the crossfader. They're not particularly useful. And the reason for that is that when a crossfader is on, it only has one way to manipulate the audio. Fully on this side here, fully on this side here, and kind of a blend between the two in the middle. This blend can be adjusted on some mixes. You can change the kind of the curves with which the volume gets turned up and down. But once that curve is set, it's fixed, and this is all you can do. However, for really good mixing, for tight controls, it's much more important for the DJ to be able to control the levels carefully and have, say, deck A on full and deck B just a little bit down. So while you will commonly see crossfaders in pictures of DJs and so on and so forth, except for hip-hop DJs who are scratching on vinyl, the crossfader is usually switched off. In fact, in many mixes, the crossfader is actually taken off the mixer entirely, so it's not in the way. These things are not commonly used. So yeah, the most basic tool for mixing is levels, volume, just simply turning one track up and turning the other one down. Now, this is not enough to do really smooth mixing, but levels are still your most important tool, and you have to really understand how they work. So I'm going to demonstrate to you a quick mix using levels. I'm actually going to use different tracks that I know mixed together a little bit better. So on the left, I have a track by my friend Steve, Head Flux, called Diversion. This is kind of a typical side breaks track. I'm going to start that playing, and you should be able to hear it. And I'm actually going to skip towards the end of this track, because typically in a real environment, I would be mixing out of this track on deck A towards the end and mixing into the start of this track on deck B. So I'm actually going to do this on my headphones, and so you'll only be able to hear the finished result. You will not be able to hear the work in process as I do this. So firstly, I'm going to skip to the end of the track, or near the end of the track. Now, ordinarily, I would just let the track play through to the section I want to start the next track in. Because of the video, I'm not just going to let it sit here for the next minute. I'm going to skip ahead towards the end of this phrase. Alright, so we've just fast forwarded this track to near the end. What we've done is I've brought it to just a little bit before the downbeat of the last phrase in this track here, Diversion. And I'm going to bring in this track here on top of it. So if we, you'll be able to, incidentally, you'll be hearing what I hear in my headphones when this happens. So when I bring in this track here, it will sound a little bit sloppy, and then I'll get it in sync using the jog wheel here, and then that will then, subsequent to that, be what the audience hears. So now I've brought these tracks into sync, I'll show you how I would mix them. Now you're hearing what the audience would hear. So, you can hear that this track on deck A finished at exactly the same time as the bass line on this track, deck B, started. You could hear that they were in sync, and so they sounded relatively enmeshed. But you could also hear that the kick drums were sounding off, and that's because I hadn't done any EQ work. I hadn't cut the bass frequencies out of one or the other tracks. So I was playing both tracks at full volume all the way through. Now this tends to make things clash, particularly low frequencies like kick drums and bass lines don't tend to overlap very well. So this is what EQs are for. I'm going to perform the same mix for you, but this time I'm going to use EQs, and you'll be able to hear by comparison how much smoother a mix with EQs sounds. So I'm not going to show you, or I'm not going to give you the audio example of how I get them in sync. You've heard that already. But I will skip back to the same point in this track on deck A, which is back here. And I'm going to bring in this track on deck B at the same point, this time using EQs to make this mix a little bit smoother. So you could hear with that mix, I cut out the bass and kind of lower mid frequencies from deck B as I brought it in. I also cut out some of the very high frequencies containing sounds like hi-hats and so on. And then I actually swapped halfway through the mix, I swapped between the bass lines or the kick drum sounds on the two tracks. And then I started bringing down deck A so that when the bass line of deck B came in, most of the track on deck A had already gone. Now, not a perfect mix, those two tracks actually have a slight harmonic clash, and I wouldn't necessarily DJ them together in the real world, but you can hear clearly there that the mix with EQs can be done more smoothly and more precisely than the mix without EQs. Alright, so lastly for this lesson, we're going to talk about headphones and using headphones. Now, using headphones is called cueing. This shouldn't be confused with another thing that you do on CDJs, which is also called queuing, finding a cue point. There are two things in DJing that are both called queuing, and what we're talking about is queuing related to headphones or listening to tracks before they go out over the main system. So, as you saw before, the process of getting two tracks in sync is a process that takes a little bit of time. And to be able to hear what you're doing, to be able to get those tracks in sync, you have to be able to listen. But obviously, you don't want all the dancers, the people who are listening to your music, being able to hear you getting those two tracks in sync. So a DJ has a pair of headphones with which they can listen to specific things, get specific things sorted and lined up through their headphones before sending that audio out to the main sound system. So this means you have a system called the queue system on a mixer, and this basically allows you to send audio from different parts of the mixer straight to your headphones so that you can listen to audio even when, for example, the volume fader is down. So if I play this track here on deck B, like so, you can't hear it currently when the fader's down. If I bring the fader up, you'll be able to hear it. But like this, you can't hear it, and the audience, if there's an audience, won't be able to hear it. However, I might want to listen to this track through headphones for some reason, to beat match, to find a part of the track, just to listen to it and remind myself what it sounds like if I've kind of forgotten. There's any number of reasons I might want to listen to it. So to send it to my headphones, I will simply push this little button up here, which is called the cue button. And if I hold these headphones up to the mic, you'll be able to hear that. So, let me turn them down a little. I can hear the audio through the headphones here, and if I bring the audio up there, you can hear it through the main system as well. Pretty straightforward. Now, obviously, this means I could, for example, cue both of these tracks, like this, and I could be playing this one here, but I could be listening to both the tracks together while only the track on deck B is going out to the main sound system. And if I turn that off, or turn that off, I can listen to just the track on deck A, while you guys listen to the track on deck B. So something else I might commonly do is have this track, deck B, playing over the main sound system while I have my headphones. These are what's called isolating headphones. So they're like earmuffs. They shut out a lot of noise when I have them on. So I could have a track playing out of the main system like this, and I could be listening to this track on the left-hand side. And then I could bring them both in by doing that, like so. Now, there are a few basic controls on the right-hand side of the mixer. We're going to go into these in detail when we do a full rundown of every feature on the mixer. But basically, you have the option of turning the volume up or down. You have two headphone jacks here that you can plug up to two pairs of headphones in. And you have the what's called the mix volume. So if this mix volume, this knob here, is turned all the way to the left, the only thing we hear through these headphones is whatever is being sent to the headphones with these cue buttons. If we turn the mix knob all the way to the right, we're hearing whatever being sent to the headphones by turning on these cue buttons. We're also hearing whatever is going out the master there. So if I have this track there, this track playing like that, this track playing on this deck with the fader closed, if I turn that down, I can only hear this track. If I turn that up, I hear this track, and I hear what's going out the main system, so I hear both tracks at once. Different mixers, just so you know, have slightly different systems for dealing with cues. The Pioneer mixers, which are more common in DJ booths than this, have a subtly different queuing system. So I'm not going to get into lots of detail about how exactly this queue works, as it does vary from mixer to mixer. If you're playing gigs, do make sure to find out what mixer they have and make sure you familiarize yourself with the queuing system they use for that mixer. It's not consistent, but fundamentally it all does the same thing.